Remember the battles of Lexington and Concord? Give me liberty or give me death? For far too long, we have been silent and allowed our bands of strength that we once formed to defend freedom and liberty to deteriorate. The entire world is watching. Patriots from around the world are praying for America and praying for peace worldwide. Never in our history has a communications project such as this taken place. Return power back to the people. Truth, transparency, and equal justice under the law. You have a choice. The choice has always been yours. Power to the people. They want you divided. They want race wars. They want class wars. They want religious wars. They want political wars. They use the media. They use Hollywood. They use political leaders. They are loud. Groupthink. Public shame against those who challenge the narrative. Slavery. They know what is coming. It is more clear than ever to them. Never in our history have they been this exposed. Never in our history have they come out from the shadows to fight. The truth is clearly visible. The New York Times controversial 1619 Project and the historian's war it sparked illustrate how this country's founding, the American Revolution, is the cornerstone of our collective understanding of this country's present. The 1619 Project gives readers a race-themed narrative of the revolution in an effort to help them see racism as pervasive in American life today. Such efforts to enlist the revolution for cause are not new. Attempts to shape public opinion and public policy in the present often begin with a retelling of the country's birth. In 1861, Jefferson Davis and Abraham Lincoln delivered their inaugural speeches, Davis as President of the Confederate States of America, Lincoln as President of the United States of America. Both included a narration of the Revolution. Davis's history lesson supported his claim that secession was a peaceful and constitutional, that the Northerners should accept it as such, and that the Upper South should feel free to follow the Lower South into succession. Now, Lincoln's history lesson supported his own claim that the succession was unlawful and even insurrectionary, that Americans in the North and Upper South should reject it as such, and that the Deep South should return to the Union. During that deadly war, both sides continued to retell the Southern and Northern audiences about the Revolution, connecting the cause of the Civil War to the cause of the Revolution. These were efforts to inspire Americans to recommit themselves to the spirit of 1776, endure the hardships of war and the sacrifice more for victory. Most famously, Lincoln's Gettysburg Address began with a particular framing of the Revolution and ended with a challenge to his generation of Americans to vindicate with military victory what his history lesson asserted as the core cause of the revolutionary generation. The Revolution's military history offers up a prosaic, simple, and traditional narrative about what spurred Anglo-Americans to take up arms against Britain in 1775 through 1776. It paints the revolution as a mass movement of common people, both on the home front, where innumerable amount of Americans offered military service through local militias, and on the front lines. There is no need to seek hidden motives for this rebellion when the rebels started rational is utterly believable. Colonists believed that their benign imperial government had suddenly turned against them, becoming lawless and curtailing long-standing English practices of self-government in American courts, towns, and legislatures. Lawless governments are genuinely scary in the 18th century as in the 21st century. And Americans' alarm was plainly on display in countless public addresses and in private letters, pamphlets, editorials, petitions, street demonstrations, and even during election returns. When they were punished for this resistance, they left their homes and their daily lives to fight against their government, many of them never to return. And while we know that the Patriots were eventually victorious and that the United States went from strength to strength thereafter, they did not know they would succeed. In fact, they had good reason to fear that they would fail. It is an extraordinary story. For many, it is too extraordinary to be true, which is why they gravitate toward those alternative revolutionary narratives that claim to identify patriots' unspoken motives and designs, to judge whether these more credible than the rebels' the own narrative, put them to the Lexington and Concord test. I often wondered recently what would have happened had Nancy Pelosi been the Speaker of the House when Abraham Lincoln was president. Would Speaker Pelosi's House Democrats use the same flimsy impeachment standard that they were currently trying to impeach, Trump? Would they try that for Honest Abe, one of the greatest presidents in the history of our country? Consider the possibilities. First, today's Democrats would have impeached Lincoln for obstruction of Congress and abuse of power when he unilaterally issued the Emancipation Proclamation. Lincoln did not ask Congress for permission when he declared an end to nearly 250 years of slavery and offered freedom to millions of slaves in the American South. He neither consulted Congress nor sought its consent before he acted. In fact, at the time Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, Democrats of the day wouldn't approve it and opposed it. And then there's the matter of the job offer to Robert E. Lee. Shortly after the firing on Fort Sumter by secessionists in South Carolina, and one day after Virginia seceded from the Union, President Lincoln sent an emissary to Robert E. Lee to offer him command of the Northern armies. General Lee declined that offer. When his native state of Virginia left the Union, General Lee left with it, eventually going on to become the commanding general of the Army of the Northern Virginia and the greatest military leader of the Civil War. Can't you see how Speaker Pelosi and many of today's House Democrats would call for an appointment of a special counsel to investigate Lincoln for Confederate collusion and bring impeachment charges for abuse of power for offering the top military command to a guy who would then go on to become the top military commander of the other side? And surely articles of impeachment would be brought against Lincoln by today's House Democrats for suspending the writ of habeas corpus across the Union as it related to traitors, spies, prisoners of war, and Union soldiers. And then there's the political side. Would Lincoln face impeachment for some of the activities by his political aides who helped him secure the Republican presidential nomination at their party's convention held in Chicago in 1860? Today's Democrats would have argued that the routine horse trading employed by Lincoln's political operatives at the convention was bribery and that Lincoln should be impeached. It was commonly known against historians that in order to gain the support of the delegate-rich Pennsylvania delegation, Lincoln's aides offered a cabinet position to Simon Cameron, the senator from that state. After Pennsylvania voted to nominate Lincoln, Cameron was appointed Secretary of War. Undoubtedly, today's House Democrats would bring impeachment charges against Lincoln, labeling that routine political log rolling an illegal quid pro quo. Would today's House Democrats seek the impeachment of Lincoln for his campaign use of unconventional political tactics? Taking a page from the playbook that would be later associated with the old-style Chicago Democrat machine, Lincoln's campaign aides made full use of their home field advantage by printing 5,000 counterfeit tickets to the Republican convention to pack the halls with Lincoln supporters. This tactic actually worked, with throngs of Lincoln supporters in the convention hall gallery cheering on their favorite son. A steamroller effect was created that led to the dark horse Lincoln winning the nomination on the third ballot. Would today's House Democrats impeach Lincoln for alleged fraudulent practices at the convention, claiming he was an illegitimate president? 2 generations before Abraham Lincoln led the struggle to preserve our fractured nation through the crucible of civil war, the framers of our Constitution established the criteria to impeach a president. They rejected the weaponizing of impeachment as a political tool, expressively limiting it to treason, bribery, or other high crimes or misdemeanors. They did this because they foresaw how tempting the use of impeachment could be to advance partisan ends. Indeed, Alexander Hamilton warned of the great danger that the decision to impeach a president could be made for political reason, on the comparative strength of parties, rather than on the limited and expressed criteria actually written within the Constitution. Although it is hard to imagine how history would have been changed had Lincoln been impeached, thankfully that never happened. But to think that it could have happened is a reminder of how fragile our republic is and how vulnerable our freedoms really are. No president is safe if a majority of hyper-partisan House members from the opposition party are willing to abuse the Constitution and trample all over our freedoms and vote to impeach on made-up, falsified, orchestrated charges, literally. And the worst part of it is that this should happen. Those politicians are taking from the people their right to choose their own free leaders through free elections. So much for government of the people, by the people, and for the people, not perishing from this earth. Folks, it's we the people. Again, I am Michael. This is the Patriot Hour. God bless, Godspeed to each and every one of you. And where we go one, we go all.